Score North on AM 1500 KSTP St. Paul, Minneapolis, 94.5 KSTP FM St. Paul HD2, and on scorenorth.com. TCL is a proud sponsor of the Score North Studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. It's Purple Daily.
Yes, it is on the all-new Score North on 1500 and scorenorth.com, the only place where you're going to find Vikings talk 5 days a week, every weekday at noon, right here on Score North on 1500 and skornorth.com. Also streaming live at YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch. If you want to get in on the action, 651-646-8255 or tweet us at SKOR North. I'm Ramie Makloff along with Judd Zulgad. Manny Hill on the other side of the glass, ready to talk some Vikings, ready to talk some football. Judd Zulgad, you ready to go?
Most definitely.
I know your interest in the AAF dwindled after 1 week.
It's the Alliance, okay? How many times do I have to tell you? It's the Alliance.
It's the Alliance of American football.
They don't want to be called anything but the Alliance, and I watched at least maybe a little bit of a quarter at the bar on Saturday.
So that's...
What were your takeaways, Judd?
What were your takeaways after less than one quarter?
The Provider beer was really good.
Good. That's
my takeaway. Provider's a go-to Zulgad staple.
And when it comes to the AAF, I refuse to call it what you're asking me to call it. When it comes to the AAF, that's the best takeaway you can get from it.
Do you
which
recall,
is that the beer was good.
I believe it was during the time Paul Tagliabue was commissioner of the National Football League. Do you guys recall there was a period of time where the league came out and was very adamant that nobody should call them exhibition games? They're preseason games. They're not exhibitions. They're preseason games because they're competitions for and I always thought that was the funniest thing because that was asking anybody in our business to then always call them exhibition games.
Right. Exactly.
It's like, don't ever tell.
Especially me. Like, I'm a child. Everything you tell me not to do, I'm going to do it repeatedly until you lose your mind.
So the league was basically trying to make it like those games actually like really, really meant something.
Absolutely. But
I suppose it makes sense because the way they were charging admission for those games, they were charging as if it meant something.
But it's an invitation to people in our end of the business when you tell them, hey, from now on, always call it a preseason game. That is an open invitation to then always call it an exhibition game.
But we have,
like Ramie just said,
we have real football to talk about this afternoon, including at about 12:20. We'll continue our position-by-position breakdown of the Vikings this offseason. Judd and I went through the quarterback position last week. Today we'll get to defensive backs. And at about 12:40, more fuel to the Antonio Brown to the Vikings fire, much to the pleasure of myself, Phil Mackey, Matthew Collar, Manny Hill, basically everybody but Judd Zulgad. So we'll get to that at around 12:40. And there is more reckless speculation than that to get into as well. Maybe even more reckless speculation, if that makes any sense. But first thing we wanted to get to was Bill Barnwell of ESPN.com. He had 5 moves to improve every team in the NFL and wanted to run through those and what he thinks the Vikings could do to improve their roster this offseason, Judd. And point one that Mr. Barnwell makes, he says, extend Sheldon Richardson. The Vikings have some tough choices to make on defense, thanks in part to the fact that Kirk Cousins has a $29 million cap hit, the 3rd highest in football. There's also no way to meaningfully restructure Cousins' deals, so the Vikings basically have to let it ride and make cost savings elsewhere. Would you try to extend Sheldon Richardson and ease some of the cap hit that he has right now?
I probably would try and extend him, but here's the problem. Is he going to go for that? And if he doesn't, and I actually have to pay him quite a bit, because if I'm not mistaken, he played last season on a very favorable deal because his career at that point had taken a downturn and been a disappointment. And he's a good player. So because we've already talked about the prospect of having to restructure and or release and or possibly trade defensive players. Keeping Sheldon would be nice, but it has to be done on my terms as well. So if he basically says, okay, gentlemen, I had a really strong 2018 pay up multi-year deal, I can't do it. So point one that Barnwell brings up is a nice luxury if you can do it. But would I move financially heaven and earth to keep Sheldon? No, I would not.
And he made $8 million last year.
That's a good contract.
You're not going to franchise tag him. If you were,
No.
that number would be somewhere around $15 million per year. That's certainly something that you're not going to do. The contracts that he has in here that he says Sheldon Richardson's next deal could be comparable to is Star Lotulelei. Did I say that right? He had a 5-year, $50 million deal. He also says that Richardson could join his fourth team in 4 seasons this March, but for something in the range of $10 million per year, both sides would be satisfied. Is that a fair price tag in your mind for Sheldon Richardson?
It probably is. It probably is. But if I'm the Vikings, am I paying it? I don't know. This all goes back to who are you going to restructure? Who are you going to possibly trade? And probably more top of mind, who are you going to let go off your roster entirely to create room? I would not, if I can bring Richardson back on another shorter deal that is fair, I do it. But this is not priority one. This cannot be. It cannot be. This goes back again to Zim loves his defensive guys, right?
Right.
And he wants them all back. And that's all well and good. But if this is going to work like it should in 2019, I got to be fair on both sides of the ball here. And I can't have a guy like Sheldon break the bank. The way I see it, he was brought in as basically you're coming off a disappointing year, make good, and we'll see. I am not now going to give him a multi-year rich contract that's going to potentially cripple me in another area.
Man, do you have something on this?
Well, I was just going to say, so what would you give him then?
My problem is I would probably go too low on the term. I would probably go max 3 years.
3 years and 35, 36.
Don't you think somebody else is going to step up and pay him?
It seems like somebody else will swoop in and try and break the bank for him.
I think they will. He'd be foolish not to test the market
because there's a few teams that have like a ton of cap space.
And I feel like whenever you're dealing with a guy like Sheldon Richardson, who has success in this league, and he's at that point in his career where you're not sure if he's still got it or if he's about to hit that cliff and production is about to drop off. Those guys can usually find one team who still believes in them and thinks they can bring them in and make them a productive football player, more productive than maybe they would be elsewhere. So I think Sheldon Richardson is going to find the money that he's looking for somewhere if it's north of that $10 million price tag. And I wouldn't go much higher than that $10 million per year price tag if I'm the Vikings. I don't know about you guys.
No,
I probably
would not
either.
No,
yeah.
Nope.
And don't you guys think too, with Zimmer, with the reputation that Zimmer has as hardcore defensive guy, been a terrific defensive coordinator for most of his career, don't you think they're at a position now where they need to try and boost this offense as much as they can? Like, that's where the money should probably go. And on the defensive side is where like the development of younger guys needs to come about. And they need to try and find some diamond in the roughs, like a guy that can step into that 3 technique defensive tackle role and might only cost $6 or $7 million a year.
And that's completely fair.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, Zim, you're a defensive genius. Coach this guy up, make this guy better than what his contract is, because that's what you do as a defensive guy.
So buzz the top thing.
All right. Number 2 move that could improve the Vikings this offseason, according to Bill Barnwell. It's a 2-parter. He says, let Anthony Barr leave and negotiate with Everson Griffin. They have just $5.8 million in cap space before even re-signing Richardson, which was the first thing that he would do. He says, Griffin, 31, still an effective player, but Stephen Weatherly played well in Griffin's absence, and Minnesota would create $10.5 million in cap space by releasing their 3-time Pro Bowl tight end. The Vikings could instead ask Griffin to take a pay cut or keep him around for another season. They hold on to Griffin. They should create a similar amount of space by releasing the duo of Sendejo and Remmers, but the Vikings are weaker at safety and along their offensive line than they are at defensive end. And I heard Matthew Collar talking about this a few weeks ago, that if you look at some of the pass rushers that are out there on the market, and I know Griffin has done a lot of good things for the Minnesota Vikings and has earned the respect and the loyalty of a lot of Vikings fans, but when you're talking about the business of the NFL and putting together the best roster you can put together with the money that's available to you, paying a 31-year-old defensive end who's probably coming off his worst season in 4 or 5 years, is not the wisest thing to do all the time.
And Hunter now would go from left end to right end. One of this I completely agree with. Barr is gone.
Yeah, I think
he's just going to be
we're all
gone.
on the same page.
Barr is gone. Part 2 is Griffin comes back on my terms. So it's on my terms completely.
Mm-hmm.
I go to him, I say, we're tearing up your contract. You got one or two choices. You can either go explore the market or here is an offer, once again, about 3 years. That's it. But Griffin at this age and with his off-the-field issues has gotten paid. Like, he's gotten paid.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point in time, I say, we'd like to have you back. We certainly have a guy in Hunter who is now our star rush end. So here are the terms. And if you want to come back, that's great. You can. And if you don't, that's fine too.
And the other side of it too is we've talked about this before. You know, Everson had the off the field situation where he missed a few games, but when he came back, he just was not the same guy that we had all grown accustomed to seeing the previous handful of years. He just wasn't an effective player at all, really. And I think the question is that more of an anomaly because of the off the field thing that he had, and it was just coming back he just wasn't really himself, or is that a sign of things to come with him?
And age too, yeah.
Yeah, and age. I mean, you look at where he's
at.
No,
he is. He is. Here is the offer. Do you want it?
Yeah.
And if you don't, that's fine.
More times than not, and there are exceptions to this rule, but more times than not in the NFL, when production starts to decline and you've reached the age of 30 or 31, the arrow almost never goes back up.
Correct.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if you're expecting Everson Griffin to be revitalized and re-energized next season, again, could happen. We've seen guys do it before, but the arrow rarely points back up once a guy's production has started to drop at age 30.
That is absolutely key cap space, though.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and at this point, every dollar counts. Number 3, Bill Barnwell says, rework the offensive line, ... again. He says, let's go to
No duh, Bill. Thanks, Bill.
Says, let's get to Revers here. One of the many spring pursuits we see as Minneapolis throws out his GM Rick Spielman reconfiguring the O-line, a unit that has improved and declined in almost perfect harmony with the Vikings' broader success over the past 5 seasons. Let's try to narrow down the game of musical chairs, he says. Third-year center, Pat Elflein, is going to stay at the pivot. Brian O'Neill, a second-round pick last year, who impressed at right tackle in his rookie season, is penciled in to start there in 2019. Rashard Hill started the season at right tackle, but he's probably Minnesota's swing tackle in 2019. Remmers, who originally was signed to play right tackle, moved to right guard. We know all this last season. He is likely to be released, which would free up $4.6 million in cap space. We're left with 3 spots in the starting lineup, one of which will go to Riley Reif, and we don't know which one yet. We've heard about him getting moved around. What do you do with the offensive line, Judd Zulgad?
Let's see here. Where should I start?
There's a lot to get to go over here.
All right. For the short term, unless you draft a tackle who you're incredibly wowed with, and I don't mean you think he's going to be good. I mean you think he can step in day one and be really good, which is not probably going to be the case, and is probably not a fair expectation. Riley Reif, at least to start the season, stays at left tackle. Remmers, you can let go. But let me make one thing very clear. The Vikings screwed him. They signed him to play right tackle, and he was serviceable there. I don't want to say he was great, but he was a serviceable right tackle. And then they had injuries late in the 2017 season and got the wild hair, stupid idea that this guy could play left guard, which, by the way, he had never played before in his life, as far as we know. And then they moved him to right guard, and yet he was a better right tackle. So, yes, at this point in time, he will be let go. But the obituary to his Vikings career should not be this was his fault. The obituary should be the Vikings screwed this guy.
Here lies Riley Reif.
Mike Remmers.
Here lies Mike Remmers. The Vikings screwed him.
So let's make this very clear. The Vikings screwed up. Left guard is the key position to me, and you're either going to draft a guy. This whole Reif, and again, people in Egan, listen. Are you really going to move this guy who played left tackle in Detroit and then right tackle? And I don't think, once again, he's ever played guard. Are you really going to be so stupid as to think that you can move him to guard? Anyway, long story short, address either via the draft, free agency, and this does not need to be a Pro Bowl player. This needs to be a nice player, all right? Let's make that very clear. This needs to get you back to the offensive line that you provided in 2017. 16 and 18 were disasters. Left guard is the position to address.
See, to me, and especially when you're in a place where you're at right now with the Vikings offensive line, it's just about getting the 5 best guys out there. If that means moving Riley Reeve from tackle to guard, then so be it. And a lot of this depends on what you end up doing in the draft, what you do in free agency, who you might have on your roster now that you think might be ready to step up and start, if you have somebody like that within the organization. I have no problem with moving him to guard if that's the way to get your 5 best offensive linemen on the field.
But if you can't play guard, it's not fair.
Might be.
Mike Remmers is not a good guard, and the Vikings moved him. Like, the positions are not interchangeable. So if you were right, that's fine. But we just saw a guy who was a serviceable right tackle get moved to the guard spots and take a huge step backwards. That's the Vikings' fault. So why would you, if Riley Reeve had a resume that screamed, okay, I used to play guard and then I got moved to tackle and I'm going to go back and play guard and I can play there. But again, you're just going to be repeating the same mistake. So I don't get that one.
Manny? I wonder too how much of this has to do with just finding stability within the scheme, and B, with the coaching staff, with the offensive line. I mean, you look at, and Collar talked about this earlier, or early last week, about when you look at New England, and New England has had different guys in and out on that offensive line too, but they've got a scheme in place, a concept with that line, and Dante Scarnecchia has been that offensive line coach forever. So there's stability on this. So I wonder if with the Vikings too, and listen, the Sperano thing last year, that was tragic and unfortunate, and that was not the Vikings' fault, what happened there. But I think just finding stability and identifying, finding an identity within that offensive line via your scheme, whatever that's going to be, with Rick Dennison, that's going to be a big part of it too.
Well, I think the scheme can help, but if you take the personnel and put them in positions that they can't play, you're a moron. And by the way, if anybody, you just made the crucial Zolgadian mistake. Never reference the Patriots. If anybody at TCO Performance Center walks into Zimmer's office and said the Patriots do, you're fired.
I'm not saying do what
Dennison,
the Patriots do. I'm just saying find some stability in that aspect.
But don't you think it starts off by putting your personnel in the best positions possible? And I'm not even saying that Reef is a great left tackle. He's not. I just think moving him to guard is inviting disaster.
I mean, I agree, but I also think the scheme is a big part of that. Because within your scheme, if you're doing things that play to the strengths of your offensive line, they're going to have success. I mean, you look at Pat Elflein, 2017, what did we see Pat Elflein be really, really good at? Pulling out and going downfield on screenplays and everything.
Their scheme
so you find the right scheme for the personnel that you have,
Elflein
you'll have success.
Was hurt. Elflein tried to come back. He couldn't. But you need to have this new offense needs to have a scheme that's responsible, but you also have to be asking the players within that scheme to do things they're capable of doing.
Numbers 4 and 5 of Bill Barnwell's 5 things to improve the Vikings this offseason lead right into what we want to talk about in the second segment of the show. And in the third segment of the show, I'll just give them to you real quick. Number 4, explore the trade market for Trey Waynes. And we're about to put our focus on the defensive backs here on Purple Daily in the second segment of the show. And then number 5, he says, add a third wide receiver to replace Laquan Treadwell. And we'll get into some Antonio Brown reckless speculation before we get out of here at 1 o'clock. You're listening to Purple Daily Score North on 1500, scorenorth.com, and streaming live right now. You can see Judd and I's beautiful faces and my horrible posture if you just stream us live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch, and we're back right after this.
Hey, it's easy to listen to Score North on 1500 on your Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, open Score North, Judd.
Awesome. Alexa, fire a coach.
No. It's
Alexa, trade everybody.
Judd, no. It's Alexa, open Score North.
Alexa, more hockey. I want more hockey.
Just say, Alexa, open Score North, and you can listen to Score North on 1500.
Alexa, open Score North. Score North. Minnesota sports. Anytime, anywhere.
This is fantastic.
Okay.
Score North.
What?
Score North.
What?
Minnesota sports.
What?
Anytime.
What?
Anywhere.
What?
ScoreNorth.com.
And this portion of Purple Daily is brought to you by Fratelloni's Ace Hardware and Garden Stores, proud sponsors of the Beer Show, heard Thursday evenings right here on Score North on 1500.
It's Purple Daily on Score North on 1500 and ScoreNorth.com. Also streaming live right now at YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch. If you want more Vikings content, check out Matthew Collar's Future of the Vikings series, available right now at ScoreNorth.com. We also have a Purple Podcast, Vikings Vent Line. If it's Vikings programming you're looking for, just go to ScoreNorth.com, go to your Score North app or wherever you download podcast and search Score North Vikings. If it's Twins content that you're also looking for, and if you're listening live, Touch 'Em All is coming up at 1 o'clock, and Twins GM Thad Levine will join us from Twins camp in Fort Myers at 1:45. He'll be sitting alongside the pasty Derek Wetmore, our Twins reporter. He'll be on live with us. That's coming up at 1 o'clock. Right now, we were just going through 5 moves, according to Bill Barnwell, that the Vikings could make this offseason to improve their team. And we had gotten through 3 of them. And today, Judd, as we go position by position and breaking the Vikings down this offseason, number 4 goes perfectly into the focus on defensive backs that we wanted to have today. His number 4 thing that the Vikings could do to improve the team this offseason, explore the trade market for Trey Waynes. And he explains it by saying one other way to free up space would be to move on from Waynes, who has a $9.1 million cap hold for his 5th-year option. He talks about earlier in his career that consistency was an issue, but he's matured and developed, and that's no longer the case.
Great tackler, too.
He says, are the Vikings likely to sign Waynes to an extension, though? It's a tough call. He'll be hitting free agency in 2020 as a 27-year-old who looks to be a very solid number 2 corner, if not a true shutdown top-tier player. And these guys make quite a bit of money. One guy who he uses as an example is Malcolm Butler, who picked up a 5-year $61.3 million deal last offseason. So if they want to keep Trey Waynes around for the long term, it's going to cost them. So would the smartest thing to do right now be to explore the trade market for Trey Waynes and move on?
This is the first one that we have gone through of this checklist that I say absolutely yes on. It really intrigues me because his 5th-year option is a ton. His value right now, given the progress that he's made as a player and his age, is probably fairly high. Mike Hughes is going to come back from the torn ACL probably early in the season at some point. Mackenzie Alexander, to the credit of this team, because I never saw this coming, has definitely improved himself. And Zimmer has proven himself to be a quarterback or a cornerback whisperer. He's done he does a fantastic job. The defensive back field of this team is continually, again and again, I think, very solid. They've developed Trey Waynes. They deserve credit for that. But does that also mean that there's an opportunity here to take him to market, shop him, possibly trade him, save more cap room again, and also replace him with a very competent player? I think the answer is yes. So this is the first one that Barnwell has where, if nothing else, I explore it for sure. And if I can get the right return, I probably do it.
I think it was last week on the show, we were exploring the possibility of trading Xavier Rhodes to free up some cap space. If you were going to part ways with one of those 2 guys via a trade, which one would you be more willing to let go?
I think Waynes, at his age and at the end of this contract, is intriguing. Rhodes, so the issue with Rhodes is could you get a team to take that contract at his age intact? And the answer is probably yes. But I think if I'm going to part with one, it's probably Waynes. Waynes has turned himself into a nice player. I don't think he's a great player. He's a nice player. He is an incredibly sure tackler. He has attributes. I think if you were to explore the market with both players, the probably more realistic move is Waynes.
There's more interest on the market for a 27-year-old.
I think with that contract now you're going to have to pay him after 2019. And my guess is if you're going to trade for him, you would do the extension right now. So you would wipe out that 5th-year option. It's going to be quite a bit that he's going to play on for the Vikings in 2019 and do a new contract now, multi-year deal. But yeah, I think if I had to trade one, and I thought to myself, I'm going to explore the actual value of said player, it'd be Waynes.
Manny, do you have enough faith in some of those guys that Judd was just talking about who on the depth chart are behind Rhodes and Waynes? You have Hughes, Alexander, Holton Hill stepped up late in last season. Do you have enough faith in those guys and in Mike Zimmer's cornerback whispering ways that you'd be willing to part with either Rhodes or Waynes this offseason to free up some cap space?
Yeah, I definitely have enough faith in those guys to let one of Rhodes or Waynes go. I mean, Mike Hughes was a first-round pick, so it's like they better have some faith.
Put
in
up
him.
or shut up time.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, and you know, and he's coming off a significant injury, and you know, hopefully you see how he performs in camp, how much he's able to do in camp, coming off the injury and everything. That's going to be important. But I mean, you drafted Mike Hughes, I think, with the idea in mind that you may end up losing a Trey Waynes or a Xavier Rhodes eventually down the line. I mean, that's why you took him in the first round. And then you got Holton Hill, who came on strong in the second half of the season when he got more playing time. And again, I'll go back to what I've been saying about Mike Zimmer. Hey, you are a defensive mind. You are respected around the league as a great defensive mind. I mean, you got to elevate some of these other guys. Mackenzie Alexander, you got to elevate these guys.
If there's one place on this roster where Mike Zimmer can make chicken salad out of chicken bleep, it would be on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah.
And specifically, as you guys are pointing out, at the cornerback position. That seems to be his MO, that he can take guys at cornerback who maybe aren't NFL ready or are NFL ready, but just get a little bit more out of them and mold them to fit his system and to be more productive players than a lot of people thought they could be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is the one place too, where if I'm going to get creative about creating cap room, if I'm going to help myself potentially on the offensive side of the ball, make some sense.
You got to make some sacrifices.
Well, they're going to have to. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Now, could you get where you need to be by releasing Griffin, Sheldon walks? Probably.
You let Barr go.
But back to the point of the decision that they're going to have to make is, okay, if you keep Waynes and he plays on that fifth-year option in 2019, he's going to get paid a ton now. So do you jump the gun there and try and trade him first? It's at least worth exploring.
Meanwhile,
it makes sense to explore it.
At the safety position, it seems like a foregone conclusion from everything that I'm reading and hearing. Andrew Sendejo is gone, right?
Yep.
His time as a Viking is over. Harrison Smith, on the other hand, he's going nowhere because that guy.
Well, he's going to Canton.
Well, yeah, but he's the cornerstone of this defense, and safeties like that are really, really hard to find. So Harrison Smith won't be going anywhere anytime soon, but who do you guys have faith in that can step up and play alongside Harrison Smith and replace Andrew Sendejo? Right now on the roster, you have Jaron Kearse, Anthony Harris, and George Iloka.
Harris.
Yeah.
Harris is a nice player. He's not great, but he's solid. And again, this comes back to the fact that since Mike took over this team, for the most part, let's say in the last 4 years, the defensive backfield's been really good. And that is a tough place. I can't tell you how many times I saw this team in the defensive backfield be absolutely atrocious and awful.
Boy, was it bad under
and
Leslie
get picked
Frazier.
apart. Oh, yeah. Well,
it was bad.
And, you know,
was a defensive back, wasn't he?
Leslie
yes,
Frazier?
he was.
When he played?
It doesn't mean a thing.
Okay.
And you know what?
Tampa 2 scheme.
Brad didn't exactly have killer defensive backs.
Right.
Now, he had Antoine, who was fantastic.
And Cedric Griffin was okay.
But Cedric Griffin at the end there was playing, I don't know what he was doing.
Right.
But the fact is that this guy as a coach has shown that he can develop players there. And so Sendejo, if you guys recall, about 4 years back, we all thought Andrew Sendejo is awful. And we all thought they're going to release him, they're going to replace him. And Zimmer kept saying, no, he'll be fine. And at the time, he was fine. So I think if you go from Sendejo to Harris, you're fine. It's not going to be, he's not going to wow you. But as you said before, you've got Smith. If you have a backfield, let's say, defensive backfield of Smith, Harris, Rhodes, let's say Hughes and Hill, it's going to be fine.
You'll probably have, with Harris instead of Sendejo, you'll probably have a few less helmet-to-helmet personal foul penalties in the backfield.
Yeah, that's true, too.
In the defensive backfield.
That's absolutely true.
But if you do what you guys are talking about doing, which is trading one of the two, Xavier Rhodes or Trey Waynes, and it seems like we're all leaning Trey Waynes, and let Andrew Sendejo walk, much like you did with Mike Hughes, where and I don't know, you wouldn't go first round to do this. But
Safety?
But you have to think down the line as far as your defensive backs. You're in an NFL offseason, you're not always operating as far as this year when you make a particular move. If you're stripping down your defensive backfield, like we're saying you strip it down, you're going to have to use some draft picks to set yourself up down the road, aren't you? You're going to have to get a cornerback and or a safety in a pretty valuable pick at some point
Safety,
in this draft,
I don't.
aren't you?
Safety, I don't.
Okay.
Safety, and you took a cornerback first round last year. That doesn't mean I don't draft one. I do. But no, I think you go to Zim and say, we took Mike Hughes first round because of this. And Holton Hill's a great find. Holton Hill's an impressive find. So I would definitely draft a corner. I wouldn't draft one high in 2019.
Third, fourth round, maybe.
Safety, though, I can find you safety. Like if you're like, we got to bring in more safeties, I can find you safety.
Unless you're taking Harrison Smith or an Ed Reed or a Troy Polamalu in the first round, then I'd probably leave safety alone.
If they drafted a safety in the first two rounds, I will drive there personally and rip the draft machine out of the wall. Now, cornerbacks, I'll give you a lot more on because they're hard. They are not simple to find. But if you draft a safety high up this year, you're off your rocker. Anthony Harris will be just fine.
All right. So
Anthony Harris is just fine.
That's our breakdown of the Vikings cornerbacks. Judd and I in the Ramie and Judd versions of Purple Daily. We'll be going position by position and breaking the Vikings down on Purple Daily throughout the offseason. Meanwhile, there was would you call it a fire started around Antonio Brown and the Minnesota Vikings before the weekend?
It was started within the building.
I mean, okay, fair to say.
Collar dropped a match and gasoline and newspapers
Xavier Rhodes
and rags.
was actually the first one to do it. He tweeted, "Welcome to town, AB," and tagged Antonio Brown.
Xavier Rhodes handed Collar a match. Collar went down the street to SA. He went down the street to SA, got a can of gasoline, bought a stack of Star Tribunes and Pioneer presses, and found some rags in the garbage, brought them in the studio, and lit the whole damn thing on fire.